Hey guys, welcome back to Community Starcraft 2. Today I'm really excited about this video. This is how to play the late game in TvP. And I'm going to try to do my best to show you guys that it's mostly about knowledge and the way you execute things rather than just straight up one race has the advantage over the other. A lot of people in TvP get to the late game and they don't really know how to transition into anything else that's going to give them an advantage. So I'm going to show you guys some games that are going to give you that advantage and what you need to know when you get in this type of situation so that you know how to react and hopefully win against Protoss players that don't really have a lot of experience facing people that know how to play the late game. So let's just go ahead and jump into the game here, and like I said, I'm super excited about this. This is MMA versus Night End, and MMA is one of the most noteworthy Terrans for playing the super late game against Protoss. And we can always learn from people like that because they have information that most other players don't. And they have tendencies that most other players don't. So most of this game I'm going to be playing on pretty fast speed because this is a super long game, obviously. We're going to go into the late game. This is going to be 36 minutes. And this is going to be a fairly long video as well because I do have two different replays. So we're going to check that out as the game goes on. So the openers don't matter too much. Reaper opener versus a quick Nexus opener. All this is very normal stuff. Only difference... No, it's just one gas. Never mind. Quick Nexus... MMA grabs the command center. And the big part as far as playing the late game is getting there in the first place and not dying before that point. You can do that by one of two ways. This first way is going to be mostly by just being passive and just purposefully getting into the late game, which is what MMA does. Or sometimes it can just happen over the course of neither player being able to kill each other throughout the game. So there's a lot of different ways you can get there, but in this game, MMA is purposefully going to not get there on his own accord. Did he kill one of his own Widow Mines? What was that? I'm pretty sure he did. That was kind of weird. Anyway. So moving forward here, this is just going to be a normal bio play from MMA, obviously. The tech lab on this is just going to be for swapping. We're just going to see basically everything getting swapped. And another command center. So, from the Protoss perspective, basically getting there in the first place and surviving throughout this is you need to know what the Protoss player is doing, which is why MMA just scanned. He's going to see the robotic space, so he'll know that he's going to have to make a second starport and start getting out Vikings in addition to his medevacs. I don't know why he didn't switch this medevac onto this reactor, but I guess he prefers more Marines rather than medevacs quicker, but anyway. So, yeah, you definitely need to know what the opponent is doing so you know how to react to it. Because, I mean, if you just die in the mid-game, then obviously you can't play the late game. So, MMA scans. He sees the Robotics Bay and the Twilight Council. This is going to be for Blink Colossus in the long term. Basically, just Vikings is going to be your answer. But this is also one of the most defensive plays. Blink Colossus is about as defensive as you can get. And the Blink, or rather the Protoss, will always have an advantage in that circumstance if the Terran is just mindlessly attacking it there. So I think that's just part of the motivation for MMA just playing a very passive game and getting into the longer stages. So not a ton going on right now. Obviously you can try to do drops and whatnot. So little drop going to be coming up. He's going to scout out for the third base timing, and you can see this is fairly early. MMA knows about it, so he's going to go ahead and land his own third base as he started a while ago. And this is going to go into quite a long game like I talked about. MMA is pretty notorious for just kind of waiting out this stage of the game and getting into a longer one. So all this part doesn't really matter too much. If you want generic TvP advice, I do have other videos for that, so check them out in the playlist. We're going to get to the point where late game starts to rear its head. We're going to see how MMA is able to play that to his advantage. So, just kind of posturing up here is MMA. He doesn't want to fully commit to anything quite yet because, like I said, the Blink Colossus play is one of the most defensive plays, and you really shouldn't be able to win with this type of timing. So the overcharge comes down. He's trying to pick off a Colossus here. And of course, being able to reduce their powerful units is a good way to get into the late game as well. Now MMA realizes that this isn't going to work, so he just goes home. On the field for the Protoss fairly soon is going to be Storm. MMA knows about that, so he already has his Ghost Academy started. And cloaking is on the way. So one way you can win, that I'm not going to show off too much in this game, is that if you have a lot of Vikings out, and they are relying on Storm, what you can do is if you ever kill their Observer and you get a cloak off, then you can kill basically their whole army with no consequence. So that's one big way you can win the late game, and honestly it's one of the most annoying things to play against from a Protoss perspective, so if you never get that far, then that's a good way to win in the late game. But that shouldn't be your only goal. Obviously, you need other ways to get through this. So, ghosts are on the way. 4 Vikings being produced at a time. See double reactor starport. So, basically, the composition you're going to want to shoot for in the late game is Ghost Viking, almost exclusively. You can pepper in things like Marines and Marauders here and there, but if you have 100% Ghost Viking, it's almost impossible for Protoss to ever engage, assuming you get good EMPs on their army. The Vikings will kill the Colossus so fast, and the Ghosts can kill the Observer and just cloak, and it's really annoying to play against as a Protoss. They can obviously throw down storms and stuff, but if they're EMP'd, then obviously they can't do that. Stalkers and Zealots are pretty worthless against this composition, so from this point on, MMA is going to be producing almost exclusively Ghost Viking, because those are the 2 strongest units against what Protoss typically has on the field in this matchup. So we're going to continue to fast forward here. One thing that Protoss can do is start making cannons so that even if he loses Observer, he still has a safe haven against the Cloak Ghost, so you want to be aware of stuff like that. 3-3 on the way. Obviously, keeping up in upgrades or ahead in upgrades is a big deal. So both these guys are on equal upgrades. The Protoss will be a little bit ahead in just a little bit. And you can continue to seek out any opportunities here that are going to afford you good battles, but you really can't afford to eat storms like this, and they're always going to be wanting to protect themselves with storms. Now this is a situation where I don't think Night End actually has an Observer in here, so these Ghosts can pretty much walk up and EMP whatever they want. And like I said, this is a big way to win a lot of these games, is if you can EMP their Templar, then the Vikings kill the Colossus and the rest of your army engages, and you should be at a big advantage. But this isn't what's going to happen, obviously, since we know this game's going to go longer. But still, reducing their count of Templar and reducing their count of Colossus is always a good way to get an advantage. Now that there's so many Zealots here, it's going to be pretty hard for him to battle against, so it's a fairly equal fight here. Pretty annoying for the Terran that they have to micro against these Zealots, but it is a very real thing. The plus side, though, is that he did reduce the Colossus count, so the Colossus count being a lot lower is going to be a big deal as this game progresses. So I did have somebody commenting that the game sounds are too loud, so I'm actually going to take a little bit of time right now and turn that down. Sorry about that. Alright. So the other thing you can do, just to try and extend the game and keep your army alive, is if you can ever pull his army away from where he wants to be, if you can just force him to chase your army for a long time and then like boost out of there with medevacs or something, that's a good way to survive while you remax back at home on whatever units you're producing. So MMA, like I said, this is going to be a really long game, as we already know. The biggest factor to giving yourself an advantage here is planetaries. Planetaries are one of the hardest things for Protoss to ever engage, regardless of their unit composition. So you need a way to buffer against as many Zealots as they're going to have, and kind of attract a lot of attention. Meanwhile, Night End is putting up a fleet beacon. He's going to start making Tempests, which you're going to see in the late game every once in a while from Protoss. And they're not that big a deal. Their only goal is to try and pick off Ghosts. So you really can't afford to just stand around and take damage from the Tempest in that circumstance. So that's what's going to be going on here. A little drop just to try and reduce the probe count here. Maybe get a Nexus is what MMA is going to try to do. So since he pulled the army so far out of the way, he can drop over here. This is all pretty basic stuff. But now we're getting to the point where we're almost in the late game. About 22, 23 minutes is pretty late. And something I didn't mention is that MMA has a nuke. And this is going to be one of the best ways to start trading against the Protoss and get them into a situation where they might lose so much that they just can't recover from a big fight. So nukes are a big deal, and this is what MMA is going to utilize to get ahead in this game. So he finds a cute little position here with his Ghost, uses the Marine to spot across the ridge, and now he puts it down here, and you might wonder, well, this is stupid. I mean, it's not really going to kill anything, but guess how much mining time he's pushing away. This is more mining time he's causing the Protoss to miss with this nuke than the nuke actually costs. So even though the nuke might not land and hit a whole bunch of stuff every single time, it's going to pay for itself in the way that the Protoss won't be mining as much as the nuke actually costs to call down. Secondarily, in the late game, you want to try and limit the Protoss to as little bases as possible, and that's going to be MMA's whole strategy here, is that if you can continue to take bases while your opponent can't, then that's how you're going to win. They're going to have no income, and there's eventually going to be one fight where you're going to have to hold them off, and if you do, then you win. So that's going to be the whole goal here, and Frost is one of the hardest maps to secure a 5th base for any race. So the nuke comes down, doesn't really do much, it doesn't actually kill anything, but the thing that it really does is it prevents him from mining throughout this entire time. So Naiden lost way more than 100 during his time where he was waiting for that nuke to be finished. And the nuke only cost 100 and no supply. So one thing I should mention is that one of the biggest ways to get ahead as Terran in any late game scenario is to take advantage of the fact that you have mules. So MMA has a bunch of extra command centers, and eventually he can get to a point where he can start to just throw his units away. So if you can throw you can throw SCVs away. So if you can get rid of SCVs and replace that with a huge army supply, and then also have other things in your army that are rather other things that don't cost supply that can still help out, like planetaries and turrets and nukes, then that's going to be a really good situation. You can see another nuke being called down here from MMA. And if you don't react against this as Protoss, you lose a bunch of probes, and that's really bad because you don't have mules, you can't recover as easily. So nuke coming down here actually was killed by the mushroom core. That's kind of annoying. But here we go, another fight, and there are observers mixed into this army, and if you can ever kill the observers, as the Vikings are doing now, like I said, Cloak will be totally unchecked until they fall back to cannons or something. So this is a lot of Vikings. There's quite a few ghosts on the field, so you can see not as many as there probably should be by now, but 7 ghosts, still pretty nice. And continuing to press up here, you want to notice that a lot of times you do need to drop scans to figure out where your opponent's army is if they're ever being aggressive or if you know a fight's going to be coming. But more importantly, they're going to try to lead out with Templars every once in a while, and you need to be able to snipe these Templar before they kill too many ghosts or land storms or something like that. So another scan comes down, he knows all about that Templar, and he can start to get on top of it. So now, this is what MMA does really well, that really no other Terran does too well, is he starts building extra command centers once he's maxed out. And I mentioned this a little bit in the macro video, that you need to just spend your money at all times. So he should be on tons of barracks, which he is right now. He could actually afford to be on even more, like maybe 3 or 4 more around this area, and maybe move this command center or something. But the extra command centers are going to be for planetaries and orbitals, so he can continue to get a huge, bigger and bigger army supply while he gets rid of SCVs that don't really do anything anymore at this stage of the game. So we'll continue to fast forward here just a little bit, because we're going to start getting into really hardcore nuke harass. You can see 2 more nukes are on the way, and 2 more Ghost Academies are on the way. So big EMPs all over the army right now, but since there are cannons and stuff, MMA's not being too anxious about getting on top there. So yeah, if you can ever get rid of the Observer, then Protoss has a really hard time dealing with that. More importantly, there's very little Templar energy in here, and the Protoss can't afford to be aggressive right now. So what we're going to see is another nuke being called down, and 2 nukes at a time makes it really hard for the Protoss to figure out where they're coming from. So there's 1 nuke coming down here, which the Protoss might know about. He doesn't quite have vision yet, but you can kind of see the dot. But secondly, it's going to take him a lot longer to figure out where the second nuke is. So it's going to be kind of the idea behind that. He kills the 1 ghost, but he doesn't realize where the other one is, and blam, there go all the probes. And those are some free probes, and eventually you're going to wear him down if you keep doing that. So yeah, keep being annoying, keep spending stuff that doesn't cost any supply to deal a lot of damage. So another nuke being called down. It's one of the same circumstance. Actually, both are in the same position. So he gets the 1, and the second one, again, kills a bunch of probes. So this is a lot harder to react to from the Protoss perspective than you would think. And these are the type of things you need to think about, is how can I cheaply start to get some damage being dealt. There's another nuke being called down, and eventually if you can just kill this Nexus with nukes, that's a pretty good trade. Like I said, the nukes only cost a 100, and if you're totally maxed out and you're not confident in fighting yet, then just find ways that cost 0 supply to continue to get further ahead. So these are going to become planetaries, they don't cost any supply. The nukes don't cost any supply, and he can continue to call these down from all over the place. And if they land, great. If they don't, it's not that big a deal. Another nuke calls down and kills this even more probes. You can see there's a lot of probes that have been lost so far. 51. It's a pretty big deal. So he's going to continue to do this up until the point where he feels like he can either fight or he's going to force the Protoss to fight because he won't have any bases. So secondarily, like I was talking about before, the whole goal here is to try and whittle the Protoss down so hard that they have no bank, which he has a pretty big bank right now, and that if they ever get into a fight and lose, they're dead. Whereas otherwise, if they got into a fight and they had a bank, they could remax. But you want to try and prevent bases from going up here, so you can send units around to scout and make sure, while you get your own bases up in the meantime. So that's what MMA is doing. But still, the nuke harass is forcing Naiden to play perfectly, or else he's going to take a lot of damage. And in this circumstance, bam! He didn't even realize where the nuke was coming from, and he got nailed. He couldn't stop it because he had no observer. So that's why killing the observers is a really important thing. So there's a lot of Tempests that are going to be on the field right now, but still, Ghost Viking does fine against it. If you just EMP the Vikings, or rather EMP the Tempest, then the damage from the Vikings should be pretty substantial. Here's another nuke coming down here, and even it's hard to miss if we can see everything where the nuke is coming from. So just constant nuke harass back and forth. He's not spending any supply other than losing a ghost every once in a while, and the money spent is worth even forcing the probes not to mine for a little while, and this is going to kill the Nexus. Bam. So a really cool game right now from MMA, and you can start to mix in later game units such as Ravens. That's mostly for PDD against the Tempests, so don't read too far into that, and you don't want to lose it to things like High Templar, but if they have a lot of Tempests, then you probably will want to start mixing in things like Ravens for PDDs. More nukes being called down, and this is so irritating from Night End because he doesn't really have an observer and no clean way to deal with this. And right then, more probes dead because the nuke got landed by this ghost. Observer came out right then, but if you can continually be irritating and kill that observer with as many Vikings as you have, then you should be fine. Also note that these Vikings do have good upgrades. So 3-1 on the Vikings, 3-3 on the Bio. If you're ever out upgraded, then that's a way you're going to lose a lot. Now there's 2 nukes being called down in the same situation, which might trick Night End into thinking that there's 2 different locations that the nuke is being called down. And again, bam, now the Nexus is dead. So Night End's on basically no mining right now because he wasn't able to deal with this nuke harass very well. And from MMA's perspective, he's really lost a ghost here and there, and he spent, again, no supply and hardly any money on these nukes and done a lot of damage. So another ghost just kind of walking past here. And MMA's just playing this out to the point where he says, eventually you're going to have to fight me because you won't have any other options. And Night End continues to have to rebuild everything, rebuild probes, gateways, everything that keeps dying, Nexus especially. And eventually he's going to get to a point where he has to attack into a bunch of planetaries and MMA's EMPs and Vikings. His army may still be strong enough to kind of push through that for the time being, but if MMA can ever remix and push it away, then he wins. Again, more EMPs being dropped here from MMA, and still more nukes being launched, so just getting whatever he can is going to be a pretty decent win. So a couple more probes killed, cannons killed, whatnot. Night End's getting pretty frustrated here. He knows that he has to go, otherwise he's not going to get a very good opportunity otherwise. Now this is the big battles that a lot of Terran players have trouble with, and you need to find ways to EMP the Templar, most importantly, so you don't take any damage from storms. So you can ideally get rid of the Colossus and they won't have any AoE. So what you want to do is you want to spread out your ghosts as far as possible. Maybe spread some out over here, maybe spread some out here. If you want to be really cute, you can load them into your dropship and just drop them on top of the army and get EMPs off that way. But you need to find ways to kill this, and if you take a bad fight, then all of a sudden all this harassment doesn't really mean anything. So MMA is going to take a pretty bad fight here, actually. So we're going to go ahead and watch that. See, all of his ghosts are clumped up. He has basically no arc. His arc is tiny, whereas it could be like way out here if he was really diligent about it. So the Colossus are going to do a lot of work. All the ghosts are in one place, so the place to storm and feedback is really easy for the Protoss to hit. So this is an example of a really bad fight that you don't want to take if you're Terran. You want to try and pick this apart more so than just kind of bludgeoning him to death. But MMA still has gotten so far ahead from this harassment that he knows he can fight this. So yeah, I mean, this looks still like a recoverable situation for MMA. He can fall back, but the more he chases, the more storms he's going to eat, and you don't want to do this. I mean, that's how Protoss gets their storm damage off, is if you just be so aggressive that you just walk into it. So we're going to watch MMA kind of die to this. So storms coming down, more storms coming down, but look at his Viking control. His entire army is in one big ball, and that's just not how you engage a Protoss army in the late game. Granted, he still did trade decently enough to be able to remax and hold this eventually, but that's an example of all this hard work could be completely thrown away if you just get way too aggressive and sloppy with your army. So more nukes being called down here once again, just being as annoying as possible is MMA. Bam, more death and destruction there. But the planetaries have building armor, they have the range upgrades, so he's still going to be able to whittle this down a little bit, and this is what I'm talking about as far as having enough production facilities. He has not been able to spend all of his money right away, and there's a lot of these that are 4 deep in queue. Look how deep in queue these barracks are. But if he had extra barracks, he would get his army put together much faster. So you definitely need to make sure you have enough production to be able to respend your bank, basically instantly, without stacking them all into one production facility. But still, eventually he can let these planetaries die. They'll buy enough time for him to get a big enough army to eventually push this away. So you don't want to just throw this away and just attack into a battle you can't win. If this was in your normal circumstance, you would see 3 Tempests, 4 Colossus, a bunch of Storms, some Archons. There's no way you're going to win this with this tiny army, so just keep falling back up until a point where you know you can win. But if he ever does win, this continued harassment is what's put him ahead. Night End is on basically like 4 or 5 probes mining, and that's it. So he's in really dire straits, and he has to win with this attack. If you're MMA, another thing you could do is you could drop a defensive nuke, maybe somewhere like right here, to force him that if he makes a mistake of continuing to walk in, you can kind of bait him into the nuke and get his army nuked, which you can see every once in a while. It almost never happens, but when it does, it's craziness. So that can kind of buy you some time as well. Maybe he's too afraid to keep going forward. He doesn't have an observer in this army because MMA's been good about killing the observers. So that's one option you can do, but secondarily, if you just hold out for long enough, the Vikings will kill everything of importance, and the rest of the army can just bowl over what's left of the Protoss. So, wow, this is a huge SCV transfer. So yeah, we'll see that. We'll see it develop eventually, and MMA will eventually win this game by virtue of being able to kill everything with his huge Viking count. He can kill all the Tempests, he can kill all the Colossus and not take too much damage. Again, you don't want to take too much damage, just kill whatever you can with the Vikings and get out of there. But he'll eventually be able to get enough units to push this away. So see him continuing to fight up here. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, man, MMA did all this great work, and he still has to defend for his life and just barely win against Protoss. Protoss is overpowered. But what actually happened there is MMA did get a great advantage through all of his harassment. That's a sick EMP, by the way. He did work to get a huge advantage with all of his harassment, but then he just threw it away with a terrible fight. So that can happen no matter what matchup it is. If you just throw away your army like that, you run your entire army and get killed by 3 or 4 storms, then that's bad. So MMA eventually does win. Let's go ahead and take a look at another game that doesn't have quite the amount of sophistication that was in this game. It's going to look a little more normal as far as how games usually play out. So this game is going to be Kaz versus Grubby, or Cass, or however you say his name. This is going to be a little bit more natural progression. It won't be purposefully trying to get into the late game from Kaz. It'll just be kind of like, it happened, and this is what happens. So this game's 41 minutes, so you can see quite a late game. So we won't focus very much on the opening parts of the game. And I know this video is getting a little bit long, but it's a video about late game. It's going to be long anyway, so kind of figured that if you're looking for late game advice, you don't want to have it summarized in 2 seconds. So I'm just going to times 8 this for a little while. Opening Reaper, getting Command Center, all really normal stuff. Second gas here from Grubby, nothing unusual. More barracks on the way from Cass, and he should start adding on a factory to get his medevacs up in the near future. So in this circumstance, Grubby's going to open Blink. Kaz might have to defend from this for a little bit, which shouldn't be too big of a deal. Just running around an unusual angle to try and deal a little bit of damage. Stim and stuff on the way. I mean, this is all stuff that you're going to see in other videos from me, so check out the playlist. That should be linked down in the comments if you want more information about other videos that I make, especially for TvP. Just having to defend this Blink a little bit, but since he has so much stuff and he has Stim done, he shouldn't really have a problem. A lot of gateways coming up here for Grubby. 3rd base for Kaz right now, as well as a 4th, so double expanding right now. Pretty greedy, but I think he's relying on keeping Grubby in his base with this kind of fake aggression. No medevacs are on the field right now, so they just barely started out. So this is kind of a little bit of a farce, and getting one of these cancels would be pretty bad, but anyway. Like I said, we're going to get into the deeper parts of the late game anyway. So, like we were talking about before, the first thing you need to know is what's your opponent's first tech and how am I going to survive against that. He knew it was Blink, and he was able to get good enough position on his units and get enough units to just push it away, no problem. So that was the first step, but he does need to continue to follow up and scout to figure out what the transition is, because this could be either Templar or Colossus, and he needs to know about that so he can supplement his production to satisfy that condition. So scan, and anytime he can get a scan down will be really helpful. His upgrades are really far behind. That's one thing I really don't like about this build, but I guess it is natural trade. So getting more stuff up here, planetary coming up on the side. Anytime you can put a planetary up rather than an orbital at a spot that's hard to recover to, you need to do that. And especially against Zealots, planetaries are awesome. These force fields are horrible for Grubby. So, more stuff coming in here now. Grubby's still trying to be aggressive. And Kaz needs to diagnose that this is Colossus on the way now, rather than just kind of doing whatever. Otherwise, the Colossus timing could kill him, and we'll never get to this late game stage. But we know for a fact that it's going to get that far. Having to recall here, so a little bit of skirmishes here and there. Nothing too crazy going on. And we'll eventually see the Colossus come up now. Scrubby's being pretty lacking on the pro productions. He finally does get it started now. Again, just trying to take as good a fight as possible. He does kill the Nexus to slow Grubby down as much as he can, but he's taking a lot of damage from the rest of the stuff that's coming through. So I guess that was kind of a decent trade. But falling back to the Planetary, once again, Planetary will always just anchor a good defensive position, so you eventually need to start making a lot of Planetaries. Storm is on the way, more Vikings being, or rather just a Viking being produced. He needs to produce a lot more than that if he's fighting Colossus. And now, by this point, it's about the time where you would think about taking a 4th base if you didn't already have one already. The 17-minute mark or so. You're going to want to think about fighting the Storm and the Colossus at the same time. So the Ghost Academy is coming up. He already has Viking production, but he does need more. I would have 2 reactive starports by this point, as well as the Ghost Academy, so you can start getting into that Ghost Viking composition that we were talking about. That does really well against pretty much anything Protoss. So a little bit of a drop here. Actually, just fake the drop. It's a ton of Marauders, too. I'm surprised he's on this many Marauders. So again, falling back to the Planetary, always a really good defensive position, and these Zealots just basically evaporate in that circumstance. So with Marauders, you can also be a little more aggressive about running into Colossus and taking Storms and stuff like that, because they do have a lot more health. Medevacs do benefit them better than Marines. So you still don't want to overcommit here, and if this was an MMA battle, he would have just sat everything in these Storms and died by now. So this is one thing Kaz is doing really well, is just trying to keep his units alive. And if you keep it alive, eventually it's going to be healed up by Medevacs, so a 34 hit point Marauder is a lot better than a 0 hit point Marauder, so try to keep your stuff alive. Now he's on the double reactor starports, lots of Ghosts being pushed out here, and this is going to, like I said, look a little more normal for late game. So we'll see a little bit more attacks coming up here. Kind of just does whiff an EMP, but if you can't EMP this whole army and EMP the Templar that are behind here, then you're going to be in great shape. Something I really can't stress enough is you need to kill the Observers, and you need to also find ways to land EMPs, because if the Protoss doesn't have Storms and they lose their Colossus, then they're dead. So if you can use things like Medevac drops, like say maybe a low energy Medevac like this, load like maybe 2 or 3 Ghosts in there and go drop it behind and then EMP his army, you're going to get really good trades after that point. So I can't overstate how important EMP is here. Colossus still being really irritating, trying to repair on that. Here's the EMPs all over the Templar, and all of a sudden he has maybe 2 Storms, and he gets EMP'd again. Does land a Storm, but still, if these units are still alive, then you're still in good shape as long as they get healed back up. So Kaz adding more command centers, you can see somewhere around here. Here we go. And those eventually probably be orbitals. Maybe he'll land a Planetary over on the side. Again, dumping SCVs and trading them out for more army supply, making more command centers for both Planetaries and orbitals. All very good moves. And he might have a timing now. He needs to be a little bit careful, but you need to kill the Colossus before you do anything. This is a winnable game right now for Kaz if he had more Vikings. This is one thing he's really slacking on. If he had more like 12 Vikings, there's not enough Protoss stuff here to deal with those Vikings very well. He could kill 2 or 3 Colossus and then engage and win the game if he were more diligent about that. So that's a good example. Oh, he does have more Vikings. Okay. Well, he obviously doesn't win right here because of one reason or another. But still, if you're able to get these Colossus down and fight, then there's just not enough there for Grubby to be able to deal with that. So there's a lot of opportunities like that you need to know about. If, like I have to state this again, if Protoss has no Storm energy and no Colossus, then they're dead. There's no way they can hold against this because there's just not any sort of units that can deal with this many units at once if you're Protoss. Other than those 2. Just coming up here with the Ghosts, and this may be why he dies, just taking too much Storm damage. Still trying to push in here. Stalkers blink forward. So both these guys just trying to shark around. And again, Koss doesn't know that he's at a specific advantage, so he just falls back. His army's pretty hurt as well, and his medevac energy is really low, so that may be why he's not too inclined to fight right now. But still, if you can ever get a good fight like this where you can EMP everything, maybe you can kill the Observer and just walk in there and EMP whatever you want. Those are good EMPs, but the Templars still have full energy, so you need to be careful about that. There's a Storm coming down. Another Storm coming down. Koss still doing pretty well here, though. See more fights coming down here, and Now Grubby's getting to a point where there's not a lot here to protect these Colossus. So again, if you can ever find a good point where you can get your Vikings on top of their Colossus, maybe kill 2 or 3, leaving them with like 1 or 2, and then attack them, then you'll be in great shape. 4 is just too many. So look at the amount of command centers on the way. 5 command centers on the way for Kos right now. Taking a forward base eventually, as there is one ghosting, but these can all be for planetaries. A couple of them can be for orbitals. This will just give him a safe place to fall back to if he does ever lose a battle. So we're not seeing the same type of harass here, but we're seeing a little bit more of the employment of extra command centers and dumping supply for mules and stuff like, or rather for more army supply. If you can ever get up to like a 170 supply army against a Protoss, it's like 120 supply, then that'll be another way you're going to win a lot of games. But flying back up here, his cause to try and push this away. Grubby knows about the Viking threat, and he's trying to kill as many Vikings as possible, so you need to be careful still. But at the same time, he still has a few too many workers. I'd like to see him dump workers so he can just mule instead. But fight's coming down here. See a little bit of the control between the Ghost and the Templar here. I'll probably have a separate video just for that because it's such an important aspect of this matchup. But again, you can use some tricks like medevac dropping Ghosts in there to land EMPs. It seems a little bit cumbersome, but actually it's really worth it if you can land EMPs with every Ghost. Then they just won't have anything to respond to anything that you have. You can see the cloak coming into play to stop the stalkers over here, so good play there. Again, notice how often he's scanning over and over, just to be sure that he knows what's going on. So by this point you're going to have so many extra command centers, or at least you should, that you can scan basically non-stop. And at this point, does this game turn into a base tree? It's been a while since I've seen this, but I hope that it does, so we can kind of talk a little bit about that, since that'll be a real possibility. Now, Grubby knows that he just doesn't have the army to keep up with this because he just doesn't really have a sufficient enough bank. But Kos needs more barracks. I mean, this is back to the situation where, yeah, this looks like a lot of barracks, but even overproducing barracks up to the point where you have like 20, just so you can refill your army right away, is totally worth it. So just make sure you have enough. So again, more base trades coming up here, and Grubby just decides to recall his army back home, so we see that. Kos knows what's going on, and still his army's pretty low, so you still need to be mindful about remaking your medevacs here. There's only 2 medevacs for this giant army, and you can see every stim hurts him a lot if he can't reheal his army, so that's another factor you need to be paying attention to. But now Kos is down to about 32 SCVs, and this is about where you want to be in the late game if you have enough orbitals to just replace those with mules. So there's basically no SCVs mining minerals, so you're just mining gas with your SCVs and mining minerals with mules. So that's a position you want to get into, so your army supply is just enormous. It looks like Grubby's up by a lot of supply, but actually if you look at the armies, that's the active forces. Let's see, here we go. If you look at the actual army supply, Kos's army is bigger, so that's going to be an advantage that you have later in the game as Terran, because Protoss can't afford to go down to 32 workers, whereas you can. So again, more base trades here. You'll notice the Colossus count is enormous. That's 7 Colossus, so you need to be able to understand that I need a lot of Vikings to deal with this. And Ghost Viking is almost exclusively the composition right now from Kos, and this is pretty normal. So killing more Nexuses. A little bit of a base trade coming up here, and this might happen every once in a while. And you need to be capable of making good decisions against this. As a Protoss player, your idea here, if you get into this base trade, is to put down extra Templar around the map so you can whittle them down eventually with storms. So you don't want to fall into that trap. You eventually want to be able to get to a point where you can kill his army, and he's almost at this point. If he were just to spread all of his Vikings out in a huge arc and just attack, he would be able to kill the Colossus well within time to clean up the rest of this army. So, bit of a base trade going on right now, and you want to be sure that you always make as good decisions as possible. You can see the Vikings are starting to rally up here. And this is one thing, once again, if he was able to kill this Observer, this army is dead because it has nothing to answer Cloak Ghosts. So right now there are Cloak Ghosts, but they're going to be killed by an Observer. So there we go, you see them get fried up. But if you ever get in that situation, you can kill the Observer, then there's nothing they can do. And the Vikings are going to be pretty much what wins the game for you. So I'd love to see us scan and kill that. Or secondarily, you also can EMP it. You definitely don't want to take a bad fight here if you're Kos. You don't want to be all bunched up against on the ramp against all these Colossus. So he should continue to fight with his Vikings. Yep, there we go. And fall back with the rest of his army, because the Vikings are going to kill a lot of Colossus. And there we go. If you can get him down to 1 or 2 Colossus, all of a sudden this isn't that scary of an army. So Kos kind of miscontrolling there just a little bit, but the base trade is in full effect. The fact that Kaz has so many extra command centers allows him to just drop mules at will, so his mining will always be good. Let's see. More drops coming out here, just trying to clean up the rest of this game. You know what, this game is pretty much over right now. Kaz eventually wins because he does have a superior form of recovering his economy. Although, I mean, Grubby still has a lot of stuff, so we'll continue to watch. So continuing to increment out the Ghost Viking is what Kaz is doing right now. Grubby's desperately trying to get things put back together. Kaz is finding bases around the map. Still, he just wants to get into this composition of Ghost Viking because it answers this stuff so well. The Ghosts will EMP basically everything here. Hopefully, ideally, the Templar, and the Vikings will kill the Colossus, and all of a sudden it's just Zealots. And Cloak Ghost against Zealots is a pretty good unit, assuming you can snipe the Observer. So, at least now you know, if I've beat this in your brain enough, that those are the things you need to pay attention to. So, Colossus dies instantly, so that's not doing anything at all. You still need to be careful against this Templar. There we go. He's able to just snipe that off. Snipe does outrange feedback, so you want to be on top of that. And still dropping extra scans over and over, so he knows everything that he's getting himself into during every single fight. He does cloak and head up here. They can just drop storms, and storms still deal damage to cloaked units, but if they run out of storm energy and they don't kill any ghosts with it, then it hardly seems to matter. So again, still trying to posture up here. Like I said, there's not a whole lot going on right now because Kaz should eventually be able to just close this out, as I don't think I would show you guys a game in which Protoss won. Still more Cloak Ghost defending against harassment here, so that's always a good option to have. There's not really much else to say. I guess this is just for closure on this video, just to see the Terran eventually be able to kill all this. So we'll see that eventually, but it's going to take a little while as Kaz is being extremely patient. Now he's starting to rebuild SCVs actually. He's only at 6, so you do need to be on top of that. But Grubby's still mining on one base, Kaz still kind of mining a little bit here and there. And he eventually does need to find a point where he can just fight this army. And there you go, if you can kill Templar for free like that, that's a big win. All of a sudden, what does this Protoss army really have? There's one Templar with energy, and the rest of the army is just walking across the map because he knows he can't fight this. So, Kaz, again, getting into a base trade once again. Grubby being really irritating, realizing that he can't fight this army, so he's going to do anything he can to not fight it. And again, you need to be mindful that when they base trade, they're going to leave a couple Templar around here and there, or at least that's the best thing for them to do. So, you need to be ready to snipe those things down. And again, is there an observer here? Yeah, I think there is, but if you can eventually kill it, then what does he have to answer this army? So, I don't know what else to say, guys. This is pretty much over, and Grubby's just taking forever to die. Yeah, he really does need to get rid of this observer here. Especially, the other side of the base trade is that if you can ever kill their robo, and you can kill their observers, then what do they have to answer the ghosts at all? Other than cannons. They'll just have to sit there, and you can rebuild your economy. But the army here is much better for Kaz, and there's no reason he should lose this at this point. So, like I said, all I want to do this is just for closure. We'll just skip ahead to the rest of this, to the last couple minutes of this game. We should eventually see a fight, and you can see there's a lot of Zealots in here, but if you land your Vikings, if there's nothing else for them to do, and you can get EMPs on the whole army, then you'll be totally fine. They'll be exploring up here once again, gonna feed back a Ghost or two. And snipes are coming back on there. There's still ghost energy left from Kaz, so he should be fine to win this battle, especially if he gets an EMP on those Immortals. There we go. Now the Observer is dead, and now, oh, he just has one more still, but Kaz should be able to see this with his scans. So, here we go. I guess this is the last fight, and if he just EMPs, and he does kill the Observer, but there still was another one there, so being quite annoying is that. But still, he eventually wore him down here, and Kaz eventually wins. GG. So, wow, that took a long time to end, which I didn't mean for that to happen. But I hope this at least gave you guys a good idea of how to play TvP in the late game, considering a lot of people get there and they don't really know what to do, and then they just die to Protoss knowing the late game better than them. So, knowing is half the battle, and now that you know, you can kind of execute similar things as what you saw in these games. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'll always be back for more videos, so look out for that in the near future. But until then, I will see you guys later.